Hi, everyone. I'm Troy, and this is the Worsted Fiber Podcast. Hello. Welcome back to our second full podcast in as many weeks. I hate to admit, but there's not much difference when it comes to my WiPs this week because there has really only been 6 days between recording the podcast. 7 days, I think, technically. Yeah, there's not much to tell, but we'll get to that. I'm Troy. I'm the creative behind Fox and Oak Designs. You can find my Ravelry store down in the description. Trying to do all the shameless plugs today. We'll see how that works. Yeah, so today's topic isn't actually knitting related. It is another shameless plug for the music making that I do. So for those of you who have been around, you know that I'm a classical musician, and my choir, the Luminos choir that I'm part of, has an upcoming concert. In fact, this goes up Monday, so the following Sunday, so 6 days from now, or week for me, 6 days from now is our a concert that we're putting together. It is Would You Harbor Me? Songs of Sanctuary and Exile. It's a really powerful program. If you're an islander or close enough to the island that you can come to the island on a Sunday afternoon, the details are Sunday, March 12th, 2:30 p.m. 2023, if you're watching this way in the future, at St. Paul's Church, which is 101 Prince Street here in Charlottetown. The choir that I'm in, so the Luminos Ensemble, actually had a rather exciting milestone this year. If you're a maritimer or someone from the Atlantic provinces, you are familiar with this, but we actually received. No, get this here. So the Luminos Ensemble. So the Luminos Ensemble was nominated for an ECMA this year for Best Classical Recording of the Year, which is super exciting. So in May, a bunch of us are going to go over. We're not going to perform at the ECMAs, but a bunch of us from the choir are going to go over and go attend the ECMAs the night that the award is announced, the winner of that award is announced. And we're going to go and enjoy ourselves while we're there. So if you're in Halifax, maybe come down to the ECMAs and you might be able to see Margot accept an award. We'll see. I don't know if we'll get the award because there are the other four nominees. They're all fantastic musicians as well. So we'll see. Fingers crossed for me and the choir. We'll see how that goes. But going back to the program that we're going to be doing here next week, I wanted to talk about a few of the big pieces in the program. We're singing about, I want to say 7 or 8 pieces. Some of them are quite large pieces, like long pieces. But the titular piece, Would You Harbor Me by, I'm going to butcher this name, Ysaye M. Barnwell. And it's a really interesting piece because it's not technically difficult. It's really just, if you were to take the words out of it, it would just really just be somebody chording on the piano, right? But the words is asking a really interesting question, which is, would you harbor me? Meaning, or at least I perceive it as akin to like asking someone in Germany, part of the Third Reich before the Second World War, would you harbor a Jewish person? So it's asking that kind of question. And then to bring it all back down to earth, later at the very end, it asks, would I harbor you? Based on, from my perception, the way that I interpret the piece is that I'm asking myself, would I harbor you based on your answers to the question of would you harbor me or a Christian, a Jew, someone from Korea, a Black person, all of these any person of color, all of these things. Yeah, so it's a really interesting piece, and I think it's haunting in its own way, because it really just, the music doesn't get in the way of the words. It's very word forward. The next big piece that we're working on, or that we're going to be performing, is To the Hands by Caroline Shaw. And it's a song about displacements, and the feeling of displacement. So it's a six movement work. We are performing it with Atlantic String Machine, the string quartet that's based here in Prince Edward Island. And they also have received a number of ECMA awards this year and in previous years. And they have a couple albums out. So link down in the description. I'll send their website, and by that extension, access to the albums. And I'll put the Luminos Ensemble's website down below as well. But To the Hands is a very interesting piece because some of it's in Latin, some of it's in English, some of it feels kind of like a story, and then there's a spoken word movement where there isn't actually any singing. All that's happening is the strings are doing crossbowing, so they're basically playing arpeggios across all of their strings, and the way that it's been laid out, it really adds a lot of anxiety to that movement. And then what the singers are doing is we're just saying numbers, and the numbers are the number of displaced people in the world at the time of the music being written back in 2016, and it's a range from smallest number to largest number. So we're starting off with like 100 people, and I believe we end up with 7,600,000. And at certain points at that, it sounds like a wash of people just talking, but it's just numbers that we're saying. And it gets kind of like, I don't know, unsettling on how big these numbers are getting towards the end of that particular movement. As I mentioned, 7,600,000 is the largest one. But there are a number of very big numbers before that. Yeah, it's a very unsettling movement, but it's a really powerful piece. And then the final piece that I want to talk about, it's not the final piece that we're singing, but the final one that I wanted to say a few things about is Mass for Five Voices by William Byrd. So William Byrd is or rather was, an English composer back in the Renaissance, back in the 1500s. And he was a Catholic in England at a time where the Anglican Church was prosecuting, is what I'll say, but it really is executing people for worshiping a different religion than Anglicism or Anglican. Anglicism. Anyway, if you were caught worshiping something other than the Anglican Church or worshiping at the Anglican Church, you would be prosecuted and, in many cases, executed. And at that time, people were being like monitored of who is going to Anglican masses. So the interesting thing about William Byrd is that he was a composer who wrote music for Anglican Mass, but he was a Catholic, and so he was writing music for Catholic masses. So this piece of music, Mass for Five Voices, is a Catholic work. It's in Latin, and I think it's called, the type of masses is iconoclastic, I think is the word, mass. It's a really interesting thing because this piece of music was written for a mass where the people who would be singing it would just be 5 people, 1 on each part. We're doing 2 and 3 and 4 on each part, because it's 16 people in the choir. But it was just 1 person on a part, Mass for 5 voices, and it was supposed to be the kind of music that people can sight read, which I think is really a testament. And Margot has pointed this out a number of times in rehearsal, Dr. Margot Raiskin, the maestro of Luminos, that it really speaks to the general level of music education that the wealthy had at the time, because this work is really hard. We're working really hard to get this performance ready, and for the first few weeks of us practicing this, we were really, really struggling with it. So now it's I mean, it's not perfect yet, but we have 1 more rehearsal and a dress rehearsal. We got 2 more rehearsals. We got it. But it's one of those pieces that it should have been, it was apparently sight readable at that point in time. Yeah, so and here I thought I was well educated when it comes to music, but I cannot sight read this piece. Yeah, it's a hard one. I have practiced it quite a bit. Yeah. Boop, 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 boop. And then there is another piece. I know I mentioned I was only going to talk about 3 pieces, but I think it's useful for me to talk about another piece. It's called "I Lost My Talk," and it is music. It's a poem that's been set to music about the residential schools in this case specifically Canada, but I think in North America generally speaking, about how the Indigenous peoples lost their language and lost, well, much more than that as well, part of their culture because of the residential schools. It's going to be a really, really powerful program. It's going to be a hard program to process at times, but the music is, yeah, it's a really powerful program. I really highly recommend that if you're able to come down, or if you're a local and you have $25 to come down and listen to the choir. I think you'll be quite moved from the performance that we'll be giving next week. So to cap off all these shameless plugs, if you like this podcast, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button for me. And hit the subscribe button and the noti bell to make sure that you're notified of when new episodes go live. So, moving right along, I am working on 2 sleeves at the same time for the Silph Eye Jacket. So this is the only work. This is the only thing that I've really gotten a lot of work done. I've got a little bit done on my shawl here. I really just cast on. That's all I did. More details on that in a minute. But yeah, I've been working on this the sleeves of my Sylphide shawl, and it doesn't look like I got a lot done because I don't. And these sleeves look really, really small. But I believe that the way the pattern is written is that the sleeves are supposed to be sitting like this on your wrist, like completely stretched. So I think it should be fine. I can fit my hand through it. And Jess's hands are smaller than mine, so it shouldn't be a problem. So before I continue talking about this, I'm going to show you what I've done on the other piece. All right. So there is all of the work that I've done on it. So this is the, well, the part of the back where I'm going to be, well, this is high on the back is that the bottom of the armholes will be. I've already cast off for my armholes right here. And yeah, so the way that this pattern has been laid out, as I've mentioned before, you work the bottom up, and as soon as you have cast off for your armholes, which I have on both sides, you actually put this away and you work on each of the sleeves. So I'm doing 2 sleeves at a time. And oh, I should mention, I'm using my Knit Picks, my Knit Picks needles. I'm using a Knitter's Pride cable for this right now, but there's a Knit Picks cable on this piece. I'm also using my stitch holders that came with my Knit Picks and Knitter's Pride cords, I'll call them, not cables, cords, just to hold the stitches in place. So that way I don't have to worry about losing anything. So that's where I'm at with this. So I am working 2 at a time. The reason why I'm doing this is, first and foremost, once I'm done of the sleeve, I'm done of both of my sleeves, or at least far enough that I'd be joining into the sweater. And there was a request that I show how to work 2 at a time. I did not record me casting this on because I cast this on, I think, 7 times. So I'm very meticulous with my cast-ons. Like if I cast on and I don't like it, I'll just rip it out after a few rows, and I will cast on and cast on and cast on. In this case, what I did is I cast on using the long tail cast on, which is what I started with this piece here, and then worked a few rows and then realized, like, that's a very tiny sleeve. And I tested it to see if I could fit my hand into it, and I can. But I wanted to do a tubular. Oh no, I just ripped my stitches out. I wanted to do a tubular cast on. So I was going to do the Pearl Soho's tubular cast on. And after troubleshooting how to do that, working two at the same time, I cast on and I used a bigger needle because I had learned from the last pair of socks that I should just use a bigger needle. And so I did. And it turns out that it made it very, very, very loose here on the cast on edge here. And it was looser than I wanted. It was actually like flaring out from the rest of the 1x1 rib that I'm doing. And I did not want that. So I decided to rip it out and use this size needle. And I tried that a few times. I tried that a couple of times. And what I was noticing is that the first few rows, the laddering that I was getting between my, I missed one. I'll fix that in a second. So the laddering that I was getting in between, like my stitches between the two needles here on the magic loop, was so much so that I could not actually account for the cast on. I couldn't account for the excess stitches. Like I'm just getting really, really wide ladders, and it was just looking really, really messy. So I decided to just bite the bullet, rip it out again, cast on using a long tail cast on, and just deal with what seems to be a small circumference for the wrist. Since I'm able to fit my hand through it, Jessie assures me that since her hands are smaller, she's not going to have a problem with it being tight. So I am just going to keep trucking on. So then this part of the sleeve is the boring part. I'm just doing the 1x1 rib, and I'll be doing the same number of rows as I've done on the 1x1 rib here. Since they're supposed to be the same length, I'm going to do the same amount of rows, and that should work out to be the same length. And then from that point, I start increasing every round, and for a few rounds, and then every second round for the next few rounds. So I'm going to be going from 36 stitches from each of the from each of my sleeves to I think 180 stitches per sleeve. So I'm worried that the sleeves are going to be yarn eaters, but I do have an entire ball basically from that I've attached to the body. I've only started the third ball. I think I have maybe 5 rows of the third ball on the body done. I've got these 2 balls here, and I've got 4 more balls in my stash. So I should be fine because I can't imagine this is going to take more than 2 balls per sleeve. And that would still leave me with 2 balls untouched and then the full ball left over to do the yoke. So I think I'll probably just use that ball and one of my other balls in my stash. So I should be okay. We will see. There'll be more updates on this as time goes on. So the next piece that I want to talk about, I'll just quickly mention the Raga sweater. I have literally not knit a stitch on it since the last time you saw it, so I'm not going to show it to you today. But I do want to tell you that I have started. I have barely just started my butterfly wings. So what I did is I am doing a garter stitch. What I'm doing is I'm doing a garter tab cast on, or what I've done is a garter tab cast on. And that is today's tutorial, how to do a garter tab cast on, and how to also gives you like the full understanding of how the garter tab cast on works. So I have cast on, I've done my back row, and now the next thing that I need to do is actually write out my pattern instead of just looking at the sheet. So that way I have a little bit more of a simplistic looking schematic than what is on that page, because there are a number of, how can I put it? The way that the schematics were written back in the 70s in Italy, at the very least, I'm not certain if that's the case for all of for Canada and the US and other English-speaking countries. But at least the schematics there, what would happen is that it would give you, like it'll stack like your increases and some of your texture stitches on top of each other in a way that makes sense. But then what will happen is that your base stitches, like your knit stitches, it just tells you like there might be five, you know, five, there might be five like squares on the graph paper, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there are 5 knit stitches between, you know, your yarn over and your next yarn over on the other side. You have to check to make sure that you see a number in the center, and that's how many stitches it is from either side. So there might be five, like stitches, like 5 squares in the center. But if one of them in the center says, you know, 13, then you're actually going to be knitting 13 across, not the 5 that's being graphed out. I understand why it's doing that, because once you get into like the final bit where there's just like huge swaths of stockinette stitch in between like the petals, instead of charting out like, you know, 40 stitches on either side, it's just charting out like the actual interesting part of the petal and then telling you, okay, on this side there's 14 stitches, on that side there's 40 stitches. So I'm going to write that out into a schematic that I that I like. And once I have knit this, I will go ahead and like put on Ravelry like what I'm doing and like give you information on what each of the stitches mean and all of that. I can't release the schematic that I'm going to be using for this, because it's directly ripped from this other pattern. And I don't want to get into any copyright issues for the defunct Italian knitting magazine, but it still falls within like I think it's 84 years at this point copyright that it would have. 84 years after the designer has passed does it get released into the public domain. So I'm just going to protect myself that way, and I don't want to deal with any lawsuits, any cease and desists, any any remove this or we'll sue yous. So yeah, I'm probably being overcautious, but I don't want to have to deal with any of that. And what I'll probably end up doing is, once it's been released, anytime someone contacts me for help, I will probably just create a FAQ list and then like take their question, clean it up a little bit, so that way it'll be a standalone question, and then answer it. So that way, if you are following this, 4 or 5 years in the future, you can see that, and you can see a lot of different people's questions and answers that I've been able to give over the course of time to solve this particular pattern. Or issues that you might have doing exactly this. We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, so I guess without further ado, we should move on to the tutorial. So as I mentioned, this is a Garter Tab Cast On tutorial. And if you haven't watched the quick episode I did about like starting the shawl here, how do I want to frame this? All right. Well, without further ado, I think we should get into the tutorial for today. So, as I mentioned before, it is a Garter Tab Cast On, and it's a great cast on for shawls or anything that you're working in the flat, and you start from the center, the center top, and then increase all the way across to make a big triangular, or in my case, a trapezoidal shawl. Pentagonal? Anyway. So yeah, I'll see you in a minute after we've done that. Hi everyone, I'm Troy, and I want to show you how to do a Garter Tab Cast On. So what you're going to need is just your needles and your yarn, and you'll need to know a few bits of information. If your pattern calls for a Garter Tab Cast On, it's going to have all this information for you. But if you are trying to just do a triangle shawl or something else like that, and you want to use the Garter Tab Cast On in place of a different type of cast on, the information that you're going to need to know is your garter stitch edging, how many stitches that is, and how many starting stitches you'll need. So in my case, I'm going to be doing a shawl that has a 3-stitch garter edge on the top, and I have 4 beginning stitches. That's important here. And I'll show you, and I'll tell you why that's important. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to cast on your 3 stitches. So the garter stitch edging, that the same number of stitches you need for that edge. In this case, I'm going to do 3 stitches. So it doesn't really matter which of your cast-ons you do, as long as it's one of the meatier cast-ons. So something like a long tail cast-on, a knitted cast-on, a cable cast-on. It doesn't really matter. You don't want to be doing a backwards E cast-on. That's the one where you just wrap your thumb and you pick it up, because that one is a fairly thin cast-on, and that type of cast-on is really hard to pick up your stitches later. So I am going to be doing a long tail cast-on, because that's just my go-to cast-on, and I'm going to cast on 3 stitches, because that's, as I mentioned, this is how many stitches my garter edge is going to be, 3 stitches. So now what we need to do, so now the next piece of information that we needed, in my case, the 4 stitches that my starting stitches are going to be for this particular shawl, we need to be able to pick up 4 stitches along the side of our garter tab. And we want to pick up 1 stitch for every 2 rows of garter stitches. So in this case, I need to do 8 rows. Since I did the long tail cast on, since I've done the long tail cast on, my first row is already done. We don't want to pull that too tight, because we're going to pick up those stitches later. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn my work, and I'm going to work 8 rows in garter stitch, meaning I knit every stitch. So in this case, you might be wanting to do a slipped selvage edge, where you slip your stitches. I don't recommend doing that here. You can do that later on. All right. 1, 2, 3. One, 2, 3. So that's 3 rows. 4 rows. 5 rows. 6 rows. 7 rows. And 8 rows. Okay, so I'm actually, all right, so I've done 7 rows, and I'm going to do my final 8th row here for this particular garter tab cast on. So here is my 8th row, and you'll notice that I got a bit of curl in here. That's because my yarn is unbalanced. So what you'll want to do is, if you have an unbalanced yarn like mine, untwist it, so that way you can see your garter stitch ridges here. So I've got one there, got one there, got one there, and I've got one there across the bottom, right here where my right thumb is. And then I've got my cast-on stitches. So now what we want to do is we're going to pick up stitches across the side here, equal to the number of starting stitches that we need outside of the border. So I need 4, so I'm going to pick up 4 stitches. So the first one I'm going to pick up is kind of in a weird place. So we've got the row below here. So this is the row, this is the stitch I just knit. This is the one that I knit into. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pick up both sides of those stitches here. So I've got both strands on my needle. It's a little tricky because you might try to lose that one there. So I've got both stitches on my needle here, and I'm going to knit this. And the reason why I'm knitting this one is because in order for me to pick up later, there's only, well, I'll explain why I'm picking up that stitch here momentarily, but that's the stitch that I like to pick up. And then I'm just going to pick up the next stitch in my garter tab, which is here. And then I'm going to rotate my stitch. The next one is, here's my garter ridge there, is these ones. So I picked up 3 stitches so far. And then I need to find my next ones. So they're right here. So I'm going to go and pick them up. Oop. There we go. Right here. And then finally, there's one more right here. So this is where it starts getting a little tricky. So I've picked up my 4 stitches along the side. So here's my 3 starter stitches. Here's the 4 stitches that I picked up. You're going to pick up one more stitch on the side and knit it. And I just dropped it. So there it is on the side. You're going to knit it right there. And then we're going to turn over and we're going to pick up stitches here on the side. So when you're casting on only 3 stitches, there's really only 2 spots for you to pick up your 3 stitches. So the reason why I picked up this stitch, the first stitch, so close to my other garter ridge here, is that because I'm picking this first stitch up on the side, it kind of equals out things here. Since there's only 2 really safe spots to pick up here, it also allows me to pick up that 3rd stitch. So I've got one right, whoop. Oh, I just lost my stitch. Yeah. So I really have 2 spots here. So what you'll kind of need to do is like re-rotate them and pull out your holes. So I've got one right there and I've got one right there. So I'm going to go ahead and insert my needle into that first hole. It's a little finicky. I'm going to knit it. And then I'm going to go back over to my second hole right here. Try not to cover what I'm doing here. There we go. And I'm going to knit it. All right. And there we go. So I have cast on my garter tab. So there's my 3 garter stitches. Here's the 4 stitches that I picked up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, looks like I have 2 stitches here, but I think my tail got caught in there. So we're going to count that as 1 stitch. And then there's the last 2 stitches. So the final thing that you'll want to do, it's usually dictated by your pattern, but what I'm going to be doing here, since my pattern is a garter stitch and it uses rest rows, I am actually going to go and I'm going to knit. Make sure I'm not using my tail. I am going to, oh, that's the tail. I'm going to knit 3, because that's my garter edge here. So 1, 2. And then I'm just going to find the actual yarn over stitch here. So it's that one I need. Pull that tight. Okay. Actually, it's the other one. Pull that tight. There we go. Now that I fixed that stitch, so there's first 2. So I'm knitting those first 3 stitches there, and then I'm going to purl these middle 4 ones. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'm going to knit these last 3. And that is the Garter Tab Cast On. So now I am ready to continue working here. So you may want to start using stitch markers at this point, or actually in the last row if you want to put them. So when I'm using stitch markers, for yarn this fine, I'm using bulb pins. And I'm just using 3 stitches here, a stitch marker there, and then I'll put a stitch marker in between each of my repeats. In this case, I'll have a stitch marker here, 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 and here. But you don't need to go quite so gung-ho in the first few until you've got more stitches on your needles. Then you can add your stitch markers in, and it won't be so confusing to look at. I hope you found this tutorial useful. And if you want to substitute this cast on here for any of your triangle shawls or any other work that starts in the center back and you're doing increases all along the back, so you have a straight edge there at the top. I'll see you next time. Bye, guys. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. If you haven't watched the episode that I have released yesterday on like the behind the scenes of doing this particular tutorial, I highly recommend it. So that way you can kind of see how much work goes into some of the tutorials, despite how like thrown together some of mine feel. At least that's my perception of it, due to time constraints. So yeah, what I've decided with that piece, if you haven't watched it yet, the series that I'm doing for this shawl, I'm going to release it every couple of weeks. My plan is to do it on the off weeks of the regular podcast. So I might do a short episode for next week. We will see, depending on what my time frames, what my time constraints are. And just a quick little, shoot the shit sort of deal, largely unedited. This week was quite edited because I'm cutting out the entire tutorial that you just watched. So that way you don't have to watch that and then watch me give the tutorial while I have my back turned, because I'm showing you the setup that I'm doing. I'm showing you how, how I mess up, how I have to rip things out, and all those fun things. All right. Well, I think that just about wraps it up. It's going to be a short episode today. So I hope... Yeah. So that just about wraps it up. It's a bit of a shorter episode this week, mostly because we did a longer episode last week. So I hope to see you here again in a couple of weeks' time for a full episode, and ideally maybe next week with another short episode on what work I've done on this, if any. I've got a very busy weekend next weekend between shows, rehearsals, and a birthday party. So I may not have time to release another episode of this between today's podcast and the one that I'd be releasing in 2 weeks' time. And if not, then I will just release it between between next podcast and the following one. So if you like today's podcast, please like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that way you are notified of new episodes and any community posts that I might put up to tell you how slack I am. And share with all your friends. Oh, ratings. I have to give a rating. I didn't even think about this. Last week I wrote down what my rating was going to be beforehand. This week's rating will be 3 out of 3 shameless plugs for the ECMAs, my Ravelry page, as well as the concert we have next week. Anyway, so if you think I'm the worst at, please comment down below with your ratings and any questions that you might have about this project, any tutorials you might want to see, all those fun things. I'll see you next week. Or next time.